Aranda.
Queridos televidentes de la Tribuna TV. Good evening, dear viewers from Tribuna TV. Today is July 25th, el 25 de julio. We're here. Happily, the myth of it raining every time I do a show was shattered today. It's not raining. It's a beautiful day outside. It was a beautiful day, and it's not raining. So I'm delighted to be here. I hope that you all had a wonderful July 4th holiday. Espero que todos hayan disfrutado del día feriado, 4 de julio, y que todos estén bien. I hope that you all are well. Sadly, the program that we had anticipated scheduling last week, el programa para la semana pasada, which deals with 9/11 and recovery after the 9/11 and the Victims' Compensation Fund, and I had a speaker lined up. We were not able to do it last week, but we are happily going to be doing it in August, which actually works out very nicely because we will be very close to the 18th anniversary of 9/11. So I'm delighted to share with you that at the end of August, I believe August 29, August 29 next month, we'll be having that show. So today we have a very interesting and what I think is an exciting theme. And I have a wonderful guest here, Dr. Peter Kanaris, who's a good close friend, good close personal friend. We've known each other. This another thing, like I seem to know people 20 years or longer, but I'm guessing that's probably fairly accurate. Right. So the theme and the topic for today is infidelity in the digital age, and en español, infidelidad en la era digital. And what we're going to be talking about, what it means, and some examples. We also have implications, psychological ramifications, treatment kinds of implications. Towards the end of the show today, I'm going to call you Peter. I take certain liberties. So you have to call me doctor. But we'll be focusing towards the end of the show on general recommendations that hopefully will be helpful for the public at large, not necessarily in terms of cyber infidelity or infidelity in general, but just in terms of enhancing relationships and creating more intimacy with your partners and with your family. So we're going to end with several recommendations in that regard. So what I did want to do today then is to introduce, I'm going to say doctor once again, Dr. Peter Kanaris. And Dr. Kanaris, he holds a doctorate in clinical and school psychology. He's licensed psychologist in the state of New York. He's also a diplomate of sex therapy, American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. He's certified. He's a graduate postdoctoral fellow, Albert Ellis Institute in New York City. I think you're aware that I had also trained under him. Amazing yes. Training, an amazing person he was. Yes. Where Dr. Kanaris served as a senior clinician, training supervisor, and faculty member. He has appeared on radio programs from San Francisco to New York, discussing various topics in sexuality and mental health. Specifically for tonight, I want to share with you that Dr. Kanaris has developed unique models of treatment for cyber infidelity and sexual addiction or out-of-control sexual behavior. And he specializes in and has many years of experience providing ethical and expert marital therapy, couples therapy, and sex therapy for the full range of sexual issues. So welcome, Dr. Peter Kanaris.
Thank
Peter.
You. Thank you.
And perhaps you'd just like to say a few words in your resume that's like about 35 pages long.
Well,
about some of the things that you do, focusing a little bit more on today.
At this point, I'm feeling like an old guy because I've been around a long time. But it's really been a lot of years of working in psychology, in sex therapy, and relationship therapy. In most recent years, my passion has been in addressing issues of infidelity and what we also call cyber infidelity. and also issues of out-of-control sexual behavior that popularly are probably more known as sexual addiction, but professionally, that's a model that has not really gotten a lot of scientific support. So we're really calling it out-of-control sexual behavior. So those areas are really have what I've developed a great deal of interest in, because you really enjoy helping people salvage their relationships, overcome the crises that they experience, and actually get to a point where the relationship going forward can be in many ways better than it was before.
Yeah, it's like you're strengthened. It's like a post-traumatic growth analogy and other kinds of issues where you've experienced a traumatic event and then you develop resilience afterwards, and because of that, you are stronger for it.
Very much so. And that's when people go through the crisis, they often don't see that as a possibility. Their expectations of what their relationship is has been shattered. And sometimes even people that, family members or friends that are trying to be helpful are actually more discouraging, in the sense of, well, get away from your partner because they can't be trusted, or some negative feedback that discourages people, and their lives are, their relationships subsequently are torn apart.
Well, it's my understanding that in some cultures there are these stereotypes that are hard to really break away, and that like a young married husband or a young married wife might be told, by parents, no, you have to stay put. This is the way things are. You deal with it between yourselves, and it's private to you, and nobody else should be in the middle of it or involved in it.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that probably is not a very helpful thing to do.
Not at all. Particularly when it's so important in these situations for people not to stay isolated, but to seek out understanding and even professional help. With the right expertise, marriages and relationships of various kinds can be saved even after a crisis like this has occurred.
I think for the viewers who've been here on the show, this is my 17th show, yay. We'll have a nice pizza party here when we reach 20. But I think that for the viewers who've been following the show regularly, you'll probably be aware that among other things, I try to focus on the definition of a problem, trying to understand the problem itself, roots of the problem, statistics, ways of dealing with and coping with the problem, how to overcome it down the road, and possible recommendations in the future. But as is true in what psychologists do mostly, who have patients and are treating patients in their private practices or in hospitals or clinic settings, one of the things in understanding a problem is to do some sort of an assessment. So you first have to have an awareness that there is a problem and an ability to accept it, and then define what the parameters of that problem, what the parameters are. And somewhere along the line, there has to be a willingness to change. So absent the willingness to change, you're not going to move forward. And then introspection, you have to be able to look inside and be willing to change. So some of these themes and suggestions we're going to be developing as we go forward with the show. Oscar, could you please put the first slide up for the viewers? We have several slides. I will also share with the viewers that the show's being recorded on YouTube. It'll be available tomorrow also on several electronic platforms, including YouTube and Tribuna TV, Facebook, and Vimeo, possibly other sites. But the first thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is, what is cyber infidelity, and how is that in some way different from infidelity? So here the National Institute of Health defines online cheating as a romantic and or sexual relationship with someone other than the spouse, which begins with an online contact and is maintained mainly through electronic conversations that occur through email and chat rooms. So, Peter, how is this different than infidelity, or is this a subset of infidelity?
Well, Roy, what I would say, it is really the modern brand of infidelity, and the most common brand. Despite my incredible youth, I've been doing this for a number of decades, and if we go back, say, before 20 years, of course, at that time, it was all just infidelity. And what would happen would be that people would meet in a bar, at a gym, or in the workplace, and things might develop, and an infidelity that would then affect the primary relationship would ensue. In more recent years,
It's like water cooler stuff.
water cooler stuff.
Okay.
All right. In more recent years, with the development of technologies, particularly technologies of the internet, so I would say the internet, social media, and the smartphone.
Oscar, can you put on the second slide?
Okay.
So the viewers can actually look at some of these things.
Yes. Those three developments that have occurred at various points over the last 20 years or so have now changed infidelity entirely. An individual no longer goes out into the world and has the opportunity or the risk of becoming involved with another person. The other person comes into the home. The analogy that I would give would be the way it is for kids these days, how bullying has changed. Days gone by, bullying would occur with a kid that would leave his house and go to school, or wind up getting picked on or beaten up in the schoolyard or some such thing. Now, kids are being terrorized and bullied in their own bedrooms.
Which can actually even be worse.
Which could be worse.
And that is called cyberbullying.
Cyberbullying through social media and the like. Well, there's an analogy there to cyber infidelity, because now through social media, for instance, there might be a couple that is, perfectly happy together, but an old friend or an old flame contacts an individual on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and they get a conversation going. One thing leads to another, and now, in effect, the threat is coming to you in the home, as opposed to someone going out and encountering it out there. What's so important about that, in my experience, is that we normally, the traditional treatments of infidelity will normally consider that, well, okay, what are the flaws in the relationship? What are the relationship issues? What are the individual issues that might be unresolved that lead an individual to be unfaithful? Now, these things are all still relevant today. What's different about that is that I have treated couples whose marriages are, we haven't found the perfect marriage yet, or the perfect relationship, but whose relationships are solid and are good in so many ways, yet the kind of threat that I described before develops, and now one interaction, another interaction, some sexting, a whole variety of things begins to develop, and now there's an infidelity that leads to a crisis in the relationship, in a relationship that was inherently solid and good. And that I have found to be a significant difference of what we might call the old-style traditional infidelities to today's cyber infidelity.
Oscar, can you put that second slide again? I just want the viewers to look at the slide 2, to look at the numbers. Okay, so we're talking about internet, social media, smartphone, but just looking at growth of the internet. If you look at 1995, okay, just 1995, you had 16 million users worldwide. You started with the advent of Facebook around 2004, iPhone 2007. Look at 2017, 3 732 million users.
That's lots of zeros.
That's astronomical.
Yes.
Oscar, the next slide, number 3, please. Again, I just want you to look at the numbers, the proliferation of the numbers. These are some of the statistics that you need to look at. Here, looking at online pornography, these are, what is this, like 91,980,225,000
I think the really interesting number is the centuries number. If you did hours in terms of centuries, that's 5,246 centuries worth of online porn use.
Okay, this is pornography.
That would be pornography.
All right.
Yes.
And in terms of the top 10 countries, well, good old United States of America is at the top, and you can see the numbers, going down from 1 to 10. And let me, por favor, slide 4. This is some of the, again, to reinforce what Peter was saying, what makes this so easy now? It's as you said, it comes to your home.
Yes.
Accessible. It's accessible. You have an iPhone. You have a computer. You have a smartphone. It's affordable. Nowadays, all of this material, electronic devices, costs really, just a few dollars. It's hardly terribly expensive. Anonymity. You can post, not mention names. Portability. It's very accessible. You carry it in your pocket. And the pre-technology affairs that you were talking about before, the more old school stuff, the threat was in a bar, the workplace and so forth. And I think that's probably, I think workplace is probably very significant. School, workplace, that was probably something really fairly common.
Yes. What I like about that acronym, it's actually AAP, AAAP, which I think is apt for these concepts.
And so again, the threats is in your living room, and it's a type of thing that in a relationship, a partner will be aware that you're not at home. Mm-hmm. The partner may ask, "Where were you?" Whether you tell the truth or not. That's something that's out of the scope right now of what I'm trying to say.
Well,
they would be aware that somebody's not there. But at home, you could be in the bathroom on the iPhone. Backyard.
I have treated cases where one partner is on the couch and the other partner is 3 feet away on a chair in the living room. Maybe the TV is on, and the second partner is sexting with another person outside of the relationship. And they're sitting together, and the other person is unawares. In fact, I've had situations where a child or another family member is the first one to become aware that something's going on.
Yeah, I know that sometimes, on movies and things like that, we see computers that are open, and person quickly tries to close it or delete the screen or change it. But obviously, this is my iPhone.
That's the portability,
right? You're sitting here. Blum, blum, blum. I could be watching the show. I could be texting. Nobody's really aware.
And people are on their phones all the time.
Yes. Yeah. So I know that, obviously this is your area of expertise, and you've been doing a lot of work. So I wanted to show the viewers slide 5 so we can take a look at what some of the typical case presentations are that you see. Okay, so these are some typical case presentations that the Dr. Peter here will be able to talk about. And I know that I have some questions that I did want to ask you, and feel free to add to it or chime in with this. But you did bring up the notion of sexual addiction before, and I don't know to what extent. Obviously, that's important and relevant. Although I'm guessing that not everything boils down to sexual addiction.
Most commonly, or I should say, one of the most common presentations in my office is either a couple coming in or in most instances, a male husband, male partner, who comes in and is presented as a sexual addict, a cyber affair or cyber affair type activity has been discovered. And at that point, the fellow is labeled as, well, this guy's a sex addict, all right? So he's got to be cured of his sexual addiction. That's the problem. In my experience, and I think the experience of many other professionals and peers of mine,
Oscar, you can take it down for a moment.
That's often a very destructive conceptualization because it's shame-based.
It's labeling. It's like that's your diagnosis. What are you? I'm a sex addict.
If it's a husband, he comes in, he is essentially labeled as the sex addict / pervert, someone who has a disease, and he's got to be fixed. And that is often a very harmful, destructive, and a conceptualization that does not have much social science behind it to support it. What does it do?
So it's a misconception.
It's a misconception, okay, but it's one that is one of the difficult parts about it is it's one that's very popularly accepted. Okay, the term sex addict is thrown around willy-nilly without people even having an understanding of what it is.
Isn't there like possibly a secondary gain or benefit to the person who's engaged or who's been labeled and is saying, well, gee, honey, obviously I have this problem, so it's, you have to be nice to me because I have this problem. I can't help myself. So.
Well, what it does, and you're onto something there, the secondary effect is that it creates a story that takes the heat off of the individuals. What it does is, as you're saying, well, I have this sickness, so I've got to find a cure for the sickness. What it also does for the aggrieved partner is that it takes the heat off. Well, it's not because I was inadequate in any way. He's a sick guy. He has this addiction, so it's not because of any inadequacy that I might have.
So self-esteem is preserved.
Self-esteem is preserved, except, you know what? It's not really. Because there is, what I find people, they still go through that awful sense of what was wrong with me that this happened. So it takes a little bit of the pressure off, but ultimately it does not address what, in this case, say would be her wound, her feelings of inadequacy, and it doesn't really take him off the hook, no matter how many programs he might go to or 12-step meetings of that kind.
Well, what you're saying is very important because I think that we need to emphasize the role of thoughts, cognitions, like I'm a drug addict, you're a drug addict. That's a label, but it's a thought. And the emotion, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I feel humiliated, emotions, and the emotions and the thoughts are not always in sync. And that's part of a problem in treatment and in recovery.
What you're getting at is really the alternative view to the more traditional sexual addiction approach to treatment and conceptualization is what I call the psychological conceptualization. Now, in that conceptualization, people have to come to understand that there are psychological reasons that contribute to this effect in a relationship, both in terms of the relationship itself or what each individual might be going through themselves psychologically. So the approach is different. It emphasizes the psychology, the thoughts, the feelings, the communication, the intimate communication, which is what I like to label it as. And it takes an entirely different approach that moves away from shame, helps the individual toward what I call a sexual wellness model. I'll work with that person to begin to, I'll ask him, what does he consider to be acceptable sexual behavior, and to actually write down a guideline of what he believes to be sexually healthy behaviors that he wants to follow. However imperfectly he may follow it, he is now he's not disempowered. He's empowered to look forward and develop a sense of, what do I want my sexuality to be? I'm going to be in charge of my sexuality. Sex is not going to be in charge of me.
That's more of a self-control model, doing the introspection and self-analysis.
Absolutely. So now he's no longer this degenerate addict. Okay, he's a person who has felt out of control with his sexual behavior, but can begin to author it and take charge of it. All right. Where, if we get a little further into my approach to treatment, my model of treatment, where my model is a little more unique is that it always considers the partner.
Let's look at slide 6. It's on 6, right? I think this one here.
I'm not sure. Might be.
The 4th session.
Yes. Okay.
So take it away, Peter.
Yeah, so again, we need to sort of what I call facilitate the narrative of the couple's story. Okay, we've got to address the shame and the guilt that the offender will typically feel, the person that stepped out of the relationship. And then we also must address the wound of the person that was affected. Of the other partner. Usually there's a great deal of hurt, anger, and insecurity that then manifests and must be addressed in the treatment. So a big part of this is what most couples will stumble over is trust has been broken. And it feels like irrevocably. Why does it seem irrevocable? Typically because the model that most people start out in their young relationships in the world is what I call the blind faith or blind trust model. I've met the presentation, trust in my life. This is the person that has my back. Until the shattering of that trust that occurs during the course of infidelity or cyber infidelity. So now the couple will look at me and basically say, I don't know how to put this together again. How could you possibly put it together? Because if I go back, if my choice is to remain in mistrust, okay, or to return back to a blind faith model of trusting, well, you know what? Neither one is going to work. There needs to be the construction of another model, another basis for trusting in order to be able to move forward. That model is what I call the evidence-based model of trust. And what that is from that point forward, going forward and trusting will be based upon the experience of what happens from here on in. And as I begin to see, as we work together, and we work what I call the collaborative model of recovering from cyber infidelity, meaning that the couple is now going to work together to create a sense of gradually increasing confidence that, you know what, there can be realistic trust in this relationship again. Realistic trust, Roy, okay, again, doesn't mean blind faith and going back to where this is a point where people sometimes have a tough time with it. I want to go back to Disneyland. I want to be able to go back and know I don't have to have a moment's thought, a moment's discomfort that something like this could happen again. Can you give me that guarantee? Part of the treatment is to realize that guarantee is not going to come. This new model is going to be, I'm going to trust based upon what I see, based upon the fact that we're working collaboratively, that there no longer is secrecy, there no longer are behaviors of concern, but rather the behaviors that we're going to see are ones that will allow confidence to slowly build and develop again.
So it's evidence-based, and by that we mean that we have goals that are defined, and you're looking at change in getting to those goals over time.
That is correct.
And
there will be, in other words, is this working? How do we know? How do we assess it? There are different points at which time we kind of assess and say, how is it going? Where is the confidence building? What areas seem to be vulnerable? Now, in the process of doing that, of course, there is a lot of emotion because most commonly the aggrieved partner goes through a roller coaster of emotion that ranges from hurt, anxiety, agitation, depression, and anger, in particular anger, where there's a lashing out. What becomes critical in all that is that that person is given the opportunity to move through those emotions with support, in a supportive environment, in a supportive context, where, in other words, now, sometimes you'll see the person that committed the infidelity, okay, will get upset because, well, we begin to make some progress, things start to look better, and now suddenly there's an association that, it was at this place that something happened, and that will now trigger an emotional emotional reaction on the part of the aggrieved
Right, you got
partner.
upset at me for nothing. All of a sudden, we're sitting here having a good time.
Exactly.
You remembered something, and then all of a sudden, we're back to where we were.
And my favorite expression that I often hear is, "Oh, we're back to square one. I thought we were getting past this. I thought." That's the absolute worst reaction.
The catastrophizing.
The catastrophizing. There needs instead to be an understanding, tolerance, and room for that person to safely go through the roller coaster and to know that, you know what, I can take it. I realize that you're just not going to snap back and feel fine about what's happened. Slowly and over time, confidence needs to be built.
Is there some sort of contracting, such as the aggrieved spouse or partner not looking through the culprit's pants, looking at every piece of paper, checking the cell phone.
It's more the
while
cell phone.
sleeping,
Yeah.
putting the thumb on the phone to open it up.
I'm glad you asked this. Roy,
Which obviously is potentially very, very
I'm very glad
damaging.
you asked this because this is, I think, where my model of treatment probably departs with many of my colleagues, okay, because I think the most common approach to that is really to discourage any checking, to discourage any kind of snooping on the cell phone or any of that.
But it's also inventing it. Like sometimes you see something and it's nothing, but you say, well, this number has to be something.
The person who's in that position is
you find, in other words, you find evidence where there isn't.
The person in that position is paranoid based upon experience. What I mean by that is that I was naive before. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't check these things, and look at this bad thing that happened. So now I have to be hyper vigilant. I have to look under every stone or every iPhone, as it were, and check. What do we do with this? Okay, do we discourage this person from checking anything? Do we say, well, your partner has to have his privacy? No. What we do as part of what I call the collaborative model, at that phase of treatment, which is still relatively early on, I get the couple together and I encourage the offender to be as transparent as possible. Arbitrarily and spontaneously show your iPhone, ask your partner if she would want to check, if she needs to see anything. Don't be resentful of it. In fact, encourage it, be available to it. Sometimes the partner, the aggrieved partner, will say, well, I don't want to be a police person, and I will let them know it's okay. For right now, that kind of checking behavior is something that, particularly if it's collaborative, okay, and it's not a cat and mouse game, is something that can help your healing.
Teamwork.
Over time, that behavior will lessen. That behavior now begins to subside and becomes. And what I encourage the offending partner to understand is the distinction that I draw between privacy and secrecy. Secrecy has to go. Privacy temporarily is compromised, voluntarily. Okay. Over time, you get reasonable privacy back as we start to move beyond the crisis.
I think the next slide, slide 7, Oscar. The next slide shows, I guess, more into the treatment.
Yes. Yes. Here again, it mentions what I call the collaborative model for the treatment and recovery from cyber affairs. The key word to underline there is collaborative. Okay. Again, if you remember before, as we were saying, a cat and mouse game is set up by an addiction model. He's sick, and his sickness, his disease can grab him at any time. He's out of control. He's got to be. Let's catch him doing the wrong thing. This is the opposite of that. This is teamwork, as you said, collaborative. It is a sense of working together, okay, and what I call the externalization of the problem. It's not him, it's not you, it's not her. The problem is out there for us to collaborate with the help of the therapist.
It's our problem.
Okay, it's our problem that we must defeat over there.
So you don't really want to, you really are discouraging. I mean, it's the antithesis of this would be the identified patient.
That is correct. That is correct. The patient is the relationship, and the enemy is the infidelity. Okay. The relationship bands together to defeat the infidelity and to ultimately improve the relationship and to restore it.
Peter, did you do you have maybe a case or two that you could just briefly tell us about? Some insights. That's just something that's reasonably typical, not like really astronomically different.
What is interesting is that the range of people, the range of relationships that are affected by this are as wide as the imagination. It's not a particular type of relationship, and the thing I want to emphasize again is that while there are relationships that are troubled, that this becomes a problem, while there are people that have early trauma in their lives and the sexual behavior now seems to be a manifestation of that trauma in terms of a repetition of the early trauma. These things certainly do happen. We work with them, we treat them. What I want to so strongly emphasize is how the technology itself that we're living, and by the way, what I'll tell you, Roy, we're only at the beginning, because what's coming and what's kind of here already, robotics, where what happens when your affair is with a robot, AI, okay, which is artificial intelligence, where now the realism of interacting with some computer-generated image, okay, is as real as you and me. These will bring, as we move forward in the future, this issue will only become more complicated by the advance of technology. And we're seeing it already. So the couples that come in, if I were to describe the most common pictures, what I had mentioned earlier, most commonly what I find is a person is being presented as the identified patient, as a sex addict or someone who's broken in a particular way, and then the message is, fix this guy. Okay, find a way of working in some addiction modality so that he can manage his disease and his illness. That is the most common thing that I find. Again, how does it get going? Most commonly, it's through social media. I find couples will come in and the contact has happened through social media. through an old flame, an old friend, or a brand new person that there's been some kind of contact in regard. One particular case that I worked with, another part of the treatment is the successful management of the technology going forward, okay? Because what do we do about that technology? All right, to give you an example, in this particular case, these were business people, and their businesses were not entirely dependent on social media, but supported by social media. Well, this particular guy, one of the things that he did was he got himself off of Facebook, he got himself off of Twitter, and he did remain on Instagram just for a business purpose, but his partner also had access to the same file, so there was complete transparency. All right, so that becomes now another aspect of the treatment is going forward, how are we going to manage the technologies, and that might also entail some sacrifices, where we can't just use technology in a totally free and as you're accustomed to way. There might have to be some adjustment. Another fellow who I've worked with, he's actually at night given his iPad, his iPhone, those kinds of devices to another person so that he wouldn't even deal with any potential triggers or temptations to pick it up.
A trigger is basically something that puts you in a greater at-risk kind of a situation.
That's exactly correct.
You know, if you have like a drinking problem, you don't want to necessarily put yourself in a bar. That would be like a trigger. So if you have problems with intimacy or with trust, being at a disco is not necessarily the best place.
That's correct.
To be at least not early in your treatment, and certainly not without your partner.
I refer to them as risk factors and protective factors. Risk factors, of course, the way they sound are things. I work with a man who, when he got off of the train, okay, and he would walk down a certain road, he would pass certain sex shops where he'd go in and he'd get involved with watching sex shows and the like and getting involved, okay? One of the things that he did, he changed his route home from work. So he would not go down that particular block. Now, does this now ensure a guarantee that a person won't fall into that? Of course not. But as a risk, it eliminates a risk factor, and it looks instead for protective factors. A protective factor would be a fellow who would, at night, have a lot of free time, get on the phone and get involved with sex workers online and interact in social media and get involved with various sexual behaviors that way. Well, okay, one of the things that he began to realize is that if he's involved with other things and he's gainfully involved and his attention is occupied, where he's not just have this expanse of free time with nothing better to do, that would allow him to have a protective factor, minimize the risk. Again, none of these things are foolproof, total things. What we're doing is increasing the odds of success and decreasing the risks.
Like walking home with a friend would be potentially like a protective factor.
As an example,
going out with family would be more of a protective involvement with family, increasing contacts with family members.
And that's the other thing too, is that when the person develops his own particular, he writes out his guidelines for sexual healthy behavior, sexual wellness. Okay, one of the things we also try to talk about is perfectionism, in the sense that if he would go outside the lines and violate his own standards, that not to treat that as a complete failure, as the end of the world, as a horror, as he's a terrible person, he's a pervert. No, he is striving to increase the probabilities of success, okay, without becoming perfectionistic and self-condemning.
Okay. Peter, we have a little bit of time left. I did want to focus on some recommendations. So, Oscar, can you put on slide 8? While he's looking for slide 8, I did want to ask Peter, what do you think about, because we talked about social media and all sorts of things like that, but what about like the incredible world of films where you have movies where women in some ways are denigrated or sexualized or in some ways demoted or made to be looked upon like sex objects, and men, the masculinity of it being tough and this and being more aggressive and obviously a lot of things now you're in bars, you're actually cheating using technology and all that. Isn't that something potentially that is harmful? And would that be part of like an assessment? Like, how much do you look at these kinds of films, and how inclined are you to model that or emulate that?
One of the things that we have learned that again, some areas of addiction treatment and whatnot will disagree with, but in psychology, one of the things we've learned, and there's data to support it, that pornography per se is not harmful. Observing pornography in this way is not addictive in the traditional sense. It's like anything else. It depends on the functional role that it's playing in your life. If a person is looking at pornography and somehow choosing not to participate in his relationship as an avoidance because perhaps in the relationship he feels judged or he's having performance issues sexually, okay, well, pornography doesn't judge you. Pornography is an area where it could feel more comfortable and safer. So really the key is not to be anti-porn, but rather to correctly diagnose, does this person have a comfortable and healthy relationship to pornography, or has it become, does he believe or she believe, it has been become problematic in their lives in some way? That's got to be correctly assessed, diagnosed, and then you go from there.
Okay. Oscar, please put on slide 8. So I wanted to share for the viewers recommendations to increase intimacy, and I want to make a point here of emphasizing that this is intimacy and it's not necessarily to increase intimacy in people who are having difficulties with cyber infidelity.
That's very helpful. At time. Usually that tends to be a little bit later in the treatment where that needs to be addressed.
I want to focus on just, increasing love and happiness and joy and intimacy, among partners and families. So some things just in general that I think that I'd like the viewers to take away with them. Beginning with communication has to be open and honest, and this is obviously something that Peter talked about.
And relatedly, Roy, the term I often like to use is intimate communication, because sometimes in treatment, therapists will be very comfortable in addressing communication, but they won't kind of dig down deep and address how is the intimate communication going. That must be specifically
talking about
addressed.
Sexual needs.
That's correct. That's correct.
Being able to share yours and to listen to your partners and to understand that. Understanding each partner's needs. Talk about factors that contribute to lack of intimacy. Staying late at work all the time, workaholic, coming home, sitting in front of the TV, eating dinner, going to bed, and that's it. Not much of a life after that. So certainly you need to focus on factors that contribute to the lack of intimacy. Engaging in little acts of kindness and intimacy, holding hands, hugs, massages, a little thank you. My wife recently, I'll share like a little moment of intimacy. She went to Mystic, Connecticut, and there's this great pizza place, Mystic Pizza. Yay, Julie Roberts. At any rate, she brought me, on the way back, she brought me an original Piper Mystic Pizza. It was delicious, and for me to say how delicious and wonderful it was, and I actually took a photograph of it and shared it, it lit up her eyes. I mean, it made her so happy, and by that I mean it's like obviously a little act of kindness.
It has been said that there is nothing more erotic than a pizza pie from Mystic Pizza.
Oh, well, I can can share that. I can share that. Enjoy activities together. Make a list of enjoyable activities. Going for a walk, going to the gym, religious outings, going to the park, beach, etc. People may be limited financially. They may be limited or physically challenged. But there's always things that you can do, and there's always something that you can do together. This is what I mean by enjoying activities together. Make a list about it. Pick up it. If you stop doing things in the past, this is a good time to really assess what you used to do, what you're doing now, what you're not doing that you used to do, and try to make a commitment to increase some of those things and enjoy them again. Make time for your partner, even if you have a busy day at work. Come home. How was your day? If your spouse really wants to say something to you, give your spouse the courtesy and enjoy of actually listening and participating in the conversation. Don't be glued to the TV to the point that you have to wait for the commercial to have a conversation. You have a 3 to 4 minute conversation. Now, okay, back to TV. All right, you can talk now. 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Well, Roy, what I would say is to that point, time, I think, has become, more than money, the most precious commodity for people. When we live our multitask, very busy lives, the first thing to go is time. We devote time to all of our responsibilities, to all the bills we have to pay, to our jobs, to running around, to multitasking, to electronics and the computer and TV. The first area that time goes is time for the couple, followed by time for me. Right. And until that a little bit of time gets reallocated, it's really hard to make things better.
So it's like resetting a sleep cycle gone wrong.
Yes.
You have to reset your priorities in terms of what's most important to you.
Indeed.
Your relationship, your marriage, love, people that care about you. Obviously, that has to come first. Among other things, work, health, taking care of yourself, and so forth. In terms of intimacy, where we are looking now more in a sexual direction, set the mood. Candles, perfume, dinner, go out, do something, not just, oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, you just want to jump on me again? Oh, come on, give me a break. Set the mood, modify routines, try new things. Lastly, Oscar, if you just put it up just one more time. The slide 8. I think that also you need to engage in and this goes back to what we're talking about assessment, an honest self-monitoring of your use of the internet, social media, and electronic platforms. You can take it off now. For instance, before you go to bed, is your iPhone at your bedside? Ya lo puede bajar. Is the last thing that you do look at your phone? Do you set it so that when the text comes through, you must look at it to see what the text says? When you get up in the morning, is the first thing you do look at your phone, see what messages you got? How often are you looking at the phone? Are you crossing the street looking at your phone? Are you driving the car looking at the phone? It's like it's talking about addiction. I mean, I think sadly that many of us in life are developing what seems to be behavioral addiction to technology and to these devices, to the point that we even have laws now that you can't be texting while driving. I think that there's a law that's supposed to pass, I believe, in New York about not crossing streets. Texting or something?
Yes.
I think I saw that recently. But my point here is that you need to really take a good look at how much of your time is invested in this, and realize how that's affecting and impacting your life, not only in many different areas, but certainly in terms of the intimacy of the relationship that you have with your spouse.
Absolutely.
Peter, any other recommendations to add to this? Because I sort of made this off the cuff.
Well, I think it covers most of the important areas. Again, the idea is that you've got to make time, and you have to create a space, not only for yourself, but for your relationship, for healthy sexuality to flourish, for intimacy and connection to stay alive. Okay, this life, this modern life, will chip away at that every moment. Okay, and again, not because anyone is individually deeply flawed, not because a relationship has necessarily to be a bad relationship of some kind. Modern life is, in my opinion, conspiring against relationships. We've got to recognize that. We've got to take measures, direct steps to work against that in order to protect the relationships that we value. Because otherwise, things go wrong.
I'm going to guess that as a general recommendation that you'd have for the viewers is that if things are going progressively more south of the border and there's increased arguments, increased staying away from home, increased distancing, don't wait for the floor to collapse. I mean, there is help available for you, but perhaps religious organizations, pastoral counseling, maybe close friends, but that's not the same thing as seeking professional help. Peter, what can people do if they have more questions? I know that you have a site. Perhaps Oscar can put it up.
I constructed a useful educational site. It's called cyberinfidelityhelp.com. And on that site, there's several things you can do. One, you can...
There it is. It's on the TV screen for the viewers.
You can download a guide to cyber infidelity that covers much of the information, and actually a lot more that we haven't had time to go into, that can be useful as a way of getting educated and starting. Also on that site, I have a number of short videos having to do with relationships, sexuality, and intimacy that might be helpful. But certainly, if treatment is sought, make sure you find a mental health professional, a psychologist that's trained in sexuality and also has an awareness of out-of-control sexual behaviors and relationships. Many people will attempt to treat this kind of thing. I've seen so many cases where people show up after they've had a couple of treatments previously with folks who might be good therapists but are really not equipped to handle these kinds of problems. Make sure whoever you see has the suitable background to be able to help the problem that you're dealing with.
Yeah, not everybody is properly trained or has an expertise in doing this kind of treatment. So we're coming to an end of the show. I did want to thank all the viewers for your time, for taking the time to watch the show. I hope it's helpful and useful to you. The show was recorded live. YouTube. It'll be accessible tomorrow on Tribuna TV, YouTube, Vimeo, and Facebook. Certainly, you're free and welcome to contact Dr. Peter Kanaris. You're free and welcome to contact me as well if you have more questions. You're certainly free and encouraged to print, download, and print the slides. You can look at them, study them. Keep them, for further review. We are going to have our next show, August 22nd, which will deal with the continuing issues of immigration-related kinds of problems, taking into consideration some of the horrific things that are taking place in the southern border presently. So I do have a guest for that, a psychologist from New Jersey. We will be talking about that. And on August 29th, we will have the 9/11 show where we will have Captain Terry Ravello will be a guest, and I have some attorneys who have specialized in the Victims' Compensation Fund who have provided me with wonderful information. I'll make it available, and we will be celebrating, I say that in quotes because it's really a horrible tragedy, but recognizing, if you will, the 18th anniversary of 9/11. So with that, gracias, Oscar. You want to say goodbye in Spanish or in Greek, or sing a song?
Hasta luego.
So thank you, viewers, everybody. Buenas noches a todos. Be safe. Be careful with that excessive heat outside. Okay, take extra care. Buenas noches.
Sigue en sintonía de